Hi there, this is Tyler Laferriere-Holloway, chapter lead for the LA New Liberals. The conversation you're about to hear is the first in a series of 6 panels entitled Freedom, Agency, and Abundance, Defining New Liberalism, in which we attempt to answer the question, what is new liberalism? Why do we need a new liberalism now? And how can we apply the values of new liberalism to the challenges facing the greater LA region? For this discussion, I had the pleasure to moderate a panel featuring Jason Bennett, Secretary and Treasurer for the LA New Liberals, Matti, Executive Director for New Democracy, and Noel Hyun, Board Secretary for the advocacy organization Thrive Los Angeles. During our conversation, our panelists were asked what they thought new liberalism meant and how it could be applied to our local context. We also talked about each panelist's personal and political histories and how that has led them to espouse the sort of political views they currently hold. I hope you enjoy this first episode of Defining New Liberalism.
Good evening, everyone. We finally made it. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tyler Laferriere-Holloway. I am chapter lead for the LA New Liberals. We are the greater LA local for the Center for New Liberalism, a DC-based project of the center-led advocacy group, New Democracy. It's my pleasure to be initiating our 6 series, or our panel of 6 conversations, attempting to answer the question, what is new liberalism? And we are joined by these esteemed people beside me, and also Matti Miranda from Washington, DC, to begin this conversation. And I'd like to concede that new liberalism, capitalized or lowercase, is something of an inside baseball phrase. The national organization and many of our chapters actually started out as the neoliberal project and as neoliberal locals. Well, certainly intended as a bit of a provocation, this name was actually intended sort of to harken back to a time when left and left of center groups in the United States and abroad had greater trust in free trade, free movement of people, the markets generally, to deliver growth and prosperity while government provided a safety net and goods and services when markets failed to do so. Now, given that neoliberal is sort of a slur among elements on both the left and the right, the name was switched to new liberal. And in hindsight, that became a nice parallel to our partners at New Democracy. Now, the trade-off is having to explain what new liberalism actually is, both to friends and neighbors, but also to ourselves. But as we all grew into our clothes as children, we've sort of grown into the label. And our growth has actually increased our diversity. Consult our national Slack, which is sort of our main social and interactive platform, and you'll find neoliberals, plain liberals, reformed libertarians, former moderate Republicans, lifelong Democrats, reformed social Democrats, old Whigs, new Whigs, trade enthusiasts, and trade unionists. And also a lot of determined Georgists who are trying to explain how land value taxes will solve just about everything. And so here we are tonight to consider what this thing we call new liberalism is, how it can apply to the new liberal project, however defined, to addressing the challenges faced by both the greater Los Angeles area as well as the state of California and indeed the nation, and how we can organize and advocate for the election of leaders who will motivate collective action necessary to create durable solutions to our region. So to help us in our discernment this evening, we have an all-star team. At least I'd like to think so. First, I'd like to introduce my LA New Liberals colleague and consigliere, Jason Bennett, Secretary and Treasurer for our chapter. Next, I would like to welcome our new friend, Noel Hyun, who is Secretary for our new friends and partners at the advocacy organization Thrive LA. And finally, zooming in from Washington, DC, where it is quite late, and so we're so grateful for her participation here, is Executive Director for New Democracy and Assistant Director for the Center for New Liberalism, Matti Miranda. So Matti, I'd like to start with you. Would you give us a sketch of your history in political organizing and activism, and what sorts of experiences were key to forming your personal political philosophy and orientation, and what drew you to the Center for New Liberalism and inspired the foundation of New Democracy?
Thank you, Tyler. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, first of all, for starting this conversation through the series that you guys have created and are launching tonight. I think it's very topical. I know you've given it a lot of thought, not just internally on how you want to verbalize it yourself, but on the people that you asked to have this conversation with you. So thank you for everybody that's being a part of it right now. I am an immigrant. I immigrated from Peru when I was 5. Before I was naturalized, I was turned away to work one of the polls during that election. And that's when it really started to dawn on me what it takes to, I wanted to find out more about kind of the machine of what was going on. So I was naturalized right after college, and then I started volunteering with the Democratic Party. By that point, I already knew my values aligned with Democrats more. I was very involved in Young Dems, and then I got together with an organization that I started volunteering with during my day job, much like some of the folks in this conversation might understand. And there came a point where I was enjoying my volunteer job more than my day job, because I was around people that were also passionate about making our communities better. And that's really what it is to me. I've always been a person that really cares about giving back. And having that dichotomy of Peru, even though I moved when I was 5, I would go back every summer. Seeing that dichotomy of government was tremendous. I've always had a huge appreciation for this country and for the political process. And I find it really valuable how you can organize what might seem like such a community, a small community, and have such a big impact. So I think that government has a role to play. I think that the entrepreneurial spirit should be awarded when hard work is made. I think that you should, if you work hard, you should be able to get ahead. And I really believe in a strong social safety net. As an immigrant with very poor parents who was also a person that received some of those benefits, I've seen a lot of both sides of the coin. So knowing Progressive Policy Institute for quite some time, I was introduced to New Democracy just recently and Center for New Liberalism. And it's amazing the energy that is going on in the local chapters and the opportunity that we really have to organize the grassroots center left, which is, we're going to talk about later, I know, but the energy, the passion, and just the need for it really drew me to the organization. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Matti. Noel, I'd like to hear from you next. Since you served in the Garcetti administration, I'd appreciate if you describe for us what drew you to public service initially, but also as a native Angelina, how you've seen Los Angeles change. And finally, if you would please illustrate for us what drew you to leadership in Thrive Los Angeles and what you hope to see from the organization's work.
Sure. So what drew me to public service? So I grew up here in LA, and then I went to a very cold, dark place called the Northeast for a couple of years of college before I realized, oh my gosh, what am I doing here in New Hampshire in, -10 wind chill, that's probably what it is there today. We could look it up. And so I came back to LA, and I'd never been so in love with LA before as I was, at the age of 19. I was I love LA. The food's great. The culture's great. And so in my early 20s, I really had this love and passion for my hometown. And so I really loved working for Eric, because at the time he had this grand vision for LA. It was the third term of his office. I was new on his planning staff. We kind of all knew, I guess it was, third term of his office. We knew at that time, oh, he has aspirations to become mayor. During law school, I ended up working on his campaign, and he had this very exciting vision for the city. But a lot has changed since then. So it's been what year is it? 2024, 16 years since I first worked for Eric. And I drew up some stats here. So in 2009, we had about 34 million tourists to LA in a year. And in 2023, I don't think they've come out with the final statistics, but they were projecting upwards of 50 million tourists. And I think it maybe in September, they had said, oh, we've surpassed 50 or something like that. So travel and tourism and what defines LA has actually fundamentally changed. We weren't a global city then. Maybe we were on the way to become one, but now we are definitely a global city. And media has changed that so much with the internet, streaming services, Hollywood exporting these cultural ideas from LA, from California, from the United States internationally. And it's just amplified by Instagram and TikTok and influencer culture and all of that. So, and then compound that with Silicon Valley and all the technology, I think what you're seeing is the pace of cultural shift is so fast now. And so I think if I could describe what has changed, it's the change happened so quickly. And so what drew me to Thrive was just not seeing the nimbleness in our leaders at the city. Governments always move slow, but they seem especially slow now. The crises that we're seeing on the streets, they're getting so horrible, and you're just seeing all of these leaders saying they have their own version of the solution, but they can't actually agree on what that means and how to get it done. And so government's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Everyone's having their version of a solution, but there's a lot of entrenchment and very little action. So that really, I think now I'm not at City Hall anymore. I don't work, in politics as a trade. I was a lawyer and a lobbyist. I'm not any of that now. Now I'm just like a regular citizen that has this background. And I'm a mom. I'm like walking, looking around in the pandemic. I was like, do I need to like move? Like, do I want to live here? Do I want to raise kids here? Like, is this what it's going to be like? And I tried to sell my house and that didn't happen. So I was kind of like, well, I guess I got to fix this place. I don't have anywhere else to go. So a former client of mine called me up and said, oh, you got to get involved with Thrive. I was like, okay, I don't have time for that. I'm busy. But a couple months later, he got me involved, and it was really interesting, sucked me back in. And I just kept raising my hand for stuff. And I guess if you could describe why am I involved with Thrive and what are the kind of people that get involved with Thrive? People say, I'm a Democrat, I'm a liberal, I want marriage equality, I'm pro LGBTQ, I want women's rights, I'm pro-choice. Like all of those social issues are like a non-issue. They're like, we live in LA, obviously these things are true. But they also want cops. And like in 2023 or 2024, like, what does that mean? Like, are you still a Democrat if you want cops? Like, can you say that you are pro law enforcement without getting canceled and still be a Democrat? Like, that's a very confusing place to live politically in the discourse. And so I think those people like me, like probably all of us here, like we need a home. And in the two-party system, we haven't figured out what that looks like. So at a local level at Thrive, we don't have the answer either, but we're like, hey, we got to have this conversation. So, yeah.
2 follow-ups. Are you a Dartmouth grad then?
I went to Dartmouth for 2 years, and that's it. And I said, oh, I'm going to USC, so I'm a Trojan.
And a second follow-up, if you were to move, where were you thinking of moving to, or did you not really?
Oh gosh, in the pandemic, we looked at moving to Utah, because my husband's a big skier and snowboarder. We looked at Austin because we have family there. I considered maybe like San Diego, maybe kind of afford like a better place, a better school district, something like that. And we visited all these places and we're like, like Utah is really cold. Like Texas, like every element of the environment like wants to kill you, right? Like the mosquitoes, snakes, like all of that.
Australia, the United States.
And San Diego was like, God, like the prices here, like it's the same as LA. So we kind of were like, nothing was really measuring up and working out in terms of the math.
Jason, last but not least, on sort of the give us your bio kind of questions.
Sure.
I'd like you to tell us, well, first of all, you, like me, are a refugee from the GOP. We
Quite.
can unpack that afterwards.
Okay.
So I'd like you to describe your political evolution and any key formative experiences in your political life and what drew you to the New Liberals. And as a card-carrying New Liberal,
Literally.
what do you think the label means, and what do you hope the movement is going to do, or what do you hope to see from the movement?
Sure. So I grew up in Nashville. My parents were both fairly conservative Christians. I grew up in a religious household, but it was one that had, I don't know, a liberal, if you will, aspect to it. You know, my father was a lawyer, but he came from a working class background. His father worked in the DuPont plant outside of Nashville, and had several nasty industrial accidents while he worked there, actually. So my father came from this working class background, was the first in his family to go to college. So he appreciated what he had and where he had come from. And he always, tried to sort of imbue that idea in me that, you should look to give back. You should understand what you have, to some extent. And this was obviously decades before the term came around. He appreciated his privilege on many levels. He then went to seminary part-time while he was working full-time as a lawyer, got his MDiv, and actually my parents spent 15 years in Venezuela as missionaries while after I got out of college. So they, sold their house, moved away from all their friends, and spent 15 years in South America as church planters. So that's a very strong example to me of the idea of being willing to give of yourself to a cause that you believe in. Secondly, I'm in software. I'm a software developer. And so from that, I take a strong sense of both pragmatism and utilitarianism. When I was in high school, I did debate, and I won a tournament running nuclear war good in my final debate. It actually works if you're in high school debate. That's the only time that it actually works. So I've always had a problem-solving perspective about my politics rather than an ideological perspective. I'm literally not a party member. I don't really care about party, but I care about who is going to solve the problems that we have. And then finally, as Tyler mentioned, being somewhat of a refugee, unfortunately, the Republican Party has gone insane and has become a useless appendage to American politics. You can say what you will about, the Republican presidents of my lifetime, Reagan, HW, W. They did some good things. They did some bad things. There's Iraq. But all of them, I think it's fair to say, love this country more than they love themselves. And you cannot say that about Trump, and you, on some level, therefore, can't say it about the Republican Party, which basically leaves you one option for any sort of sanity in American politics today. And then to answer the final question, what attracted me to New Liberalism was the fact that it was not an ideological space, that New Liberalism is fundamentally about making the world a better place through practical change. So many political organizations just love to make noise, love to say things that sound good to themselves. They love to rile people up. They are in it in many ways just for the emotional fix. And I fundamentally believe that New Liberalism is about fixing things rather than riling people up.
Noel, I'd like to come back to you. You've navigated the centers of political power in Los Angeles. You've served as a land use attorney. You've represented developers to communities in the neighborhoods. You have an extensive resume of leadership in coalition building and nonprofit work. And yet you are now a leader of an organization advocating for change and revitalization of our public life here in LA. What do you think changed, broke even in our local political establishment that requires new coalitions and alignments? And what do you hope to see from Private LA's work in 5, 10, 20 years time? And what would you consider metrics of success?
So I would say around 2013, 2014, city council started running very differently than it did prior to then. And that's because Sacramento term limits kicked in. And you had a lot of legislators that had done their years in Sacramento as a state senator or a state assembly person, and they had nowhere to go. They got termed out, but they didn't want to become a consultant or a lobbyist or go to the private sector, and they needed kind of a soft landing. And so for those politicians, they already had a base, they had fundraising support. It was pretty easy to just run for city council at that point. And so you saw all of these legislators that were used to working in caucuses and lots of things happening behind closed doors, because obviously the state legislature is much larger than just 15 people. And city council stopped having debate on the floor. Almost everything that came to the city council floor, everything was decided before the meeting. Everyone knew how the vote was going to happen. Public comment was really just a formality. And I believe it's really because a Sacramento style of politics landed in LA at that point in time. Now we've seen election cycles change, right? So LA voted to align the municipal elections with the federal elections. There's pros and cons, it's all one ballot, no one gets confused, all of that. But it's a really long ballot and it's very overwhelming. And I think it's fueled voter apathy. All the candidates are competing for the same consultants, the same media time, all the voters' attention, all of the voters' mail. Voters are getting flooded with so many mailers in their mailbox. It's like junk mail. You don't even have time to sort through all of it. And so all of these efforts to make things easier has actually created a lot more noise and I think a lot more confusion. And that on top of kind of digital campaigns and how digital campaigns are launched and the divisiveness and polarization that happens online and the lack of nuance in those forums, I think has really not done a service to like the marketplace of ideas. It's very rare, I think, for people to be sitting in a room like this and exchanging ideas. And I'm sure some of us will chat after this is over. And I say, I really thought what you said about this was really cool. And what do you think about this? And have this dialogue, right? Like you can't have that effectively in very many places before. So it just becomes so much easier to be siloed off. And I just lost my train of thought. So I think that's really kind of like what broke. And actually, the Washington Post actually put out an article about this 4 days ago, and they've termed it affective polarization, and they're describing it as policy preferences which are entangled with visceral dislike of opposition, which basically means politics has become so emotional that people aren't looking at research and data in formulating policy conclusions. They're just deciding, well, I don't like this person, so whatever is the opposite of what they want, or I identify with this group, so I'm going to vote with them without really questioning or understanding what they stand for. I think you've seen that a lot with DSA and BLM and some of the articles that have come out since October 7th, and people that have felt really kind of betrayed by the left. And so there's going to be a lot of shifting going on. In terms of like what I'd like to see, Thrive do in 5, 10, 20 years, there's always been the typical business organizations in LA that work to advocate for, business versus union. There's the Chamber of Commerce, there's a business organization in the Valley, there's a business organization in downtown LA. Well, we can't really rely on businesses anymore to hold the middle. We really need people to show up, and not just the corporations to come to public hearings and say why they want something or don't want something. So I'd really like to see Thrive organize actual voters and citizens, like regular people, to come and get educated on local policy. I just have not seen that in my time in politics until very recently, I want to say. I think the issue of homelessness has really touched home for a lot of people, and safety too. And so I'm hoping that the pendulum will swing. I think the question is, how far will it swing? How quickly will it swing? And while I'd like to see a bigger swing, the reality is it's just going to keep swinging back. So we really need a group to kind of hold the middle, because that's going to create the largest window for good change, I think, for both sides.
Jason, I'll come back to you.
Yep.
I've come to find out that you have many friendships across many organizations, which is wonderful, including with elected representatives. And there are lots of groups in our orbits that could have easily satisfied a political itch, like abundant housing, YIMBY, transportation groups, democratic clubs, so on and so forth. So why us? Why the LA New Liberals? And what do you hope to see from our little pirate skiff, our motley crew, in terms of philosophy and activities that are potentially missing from other actors in the ecosystem?
Sure. So I'll tell a story. Back in 2022, I had just joined just joined the LA New Liberals. They had just started to sort of revitalize the chapter. But I was on a bunch of YIMBY mailing lists as well. So I got an email, hey, we'd love for you to help lobby Portantino because AB 2097 and SB 25 were going through his committee at that time. So I'm like, yeah, great. I'd love to. So I jumped on this Zoom call, and most everyone else on the Zoom call was from AHLA, actually. I was one of the randos on the call.
Abundant housing for those who are not.
Sorry, thank you. Right, abundant housing. So time comes, we get on the Zoom call with Portantino, and I went last just because. And everyone else on the call, when they introduced themselves as either a colonizer or a gentrifier, including the guy who lived in Monrovia. And that didn't make any sense to me, frankly, on a lot of levels. And so I appreciated that the New Liberals, sit in the sane center, if you will, solving problems, as I said before, and not going around and playing silly language games instead.
This was members of Abundant Housing?
Yep.
Yeah, they've been taken over.
Just to clarify for other folks, Portantino is
current state senator Anthony Portantino, he chaired a major, I forget which committee it was in the state senate, but was notorious for blocking housing bills for years. Our hero Laura Friedman eventually prevailed upon him to get a few of her bills through, but he terminated many of them without vote in his committee for a long time.
And also to clarify, current state assembly member Laura Friedman,
yes,
is now running for Adam Schiff's open seat
against Anthony Portantino.
That's correct. Back to you, Matti. What do you think is currently missing from the Democratic Party / center-left politics that requires an organization like CNL, New Democracy, and why now?
I feel like Noel answered that for me, right? You were mentioning about your experiences where you have seen Democrats, wonder if they're Democrats, if they support the police, but also support this. It's a weird time to be a Democrat. And what's happened is somehow the Democratic Party got hijacked by the extreme left. And even though their points of view are too extreme for most Americans, they're the loudest. And they connect with a lot of people. Again, like Noel mentioned, emotion is a big way to connect with people, and they do that well. And so the Democratic Party is now identified as people that I don't agree with, that don't want the same things that I do, that have the same values. I personally do not believe in litmus tests and purity tests, like, it's already been mentioned, like the DSA, for example. Right now, a lot of Democrats are confused about where to be. We have a big election, and we need to be able to provide cover for our elected officials that are running in these heated primaries, like we also just mentioned. But that also starts with letting them know that we exist. Building that community, again, going back to the local chapters of young folks who are out there knocking doors, getting, visibility out, doing all that kind of good field work, and having those policy conversations is really important. There's a lot at stake on the ballot this year, and we just it's urgent. A lot of my rights, a lot of your rights, really are dependent on what happens in November. So I think claiming that mantle, that not just big tent, but the home base. This is where your community is. I think that that's really important, and that's what we're setting out to do at New Democracy.
Like being called the young person. Having turned 31 this December.
Oh, you're young.
Thank you. Noel, you're sort of the external observer this evening as sort of a non-new liberal, but maybe we can entice you over to our side. When you first heard the label, though, what did you sort of think? What sort of bells, alarms, or otherwise rang in your head?
So LA New Liberals came up in a WhatsApp chat group amongst me and Sam and some of the other members of Thrive. And it was like, oh yeah, this group. And so someone else asked, oh, what's this group? And I said something like, oh, sounds like a shill for DSA or something. Are they launching another branch?
We are shills.
Because I'd never heard the term before, and it was like, oh, they're trying to rebrand. Of course I was set straight, and I looked at the website, and I was like, oh, this is really kind of old school. The website has like, about us and like what we believe, I think, and it's a lot of like classic, more like philosophical ideals. Like you're not really taking a stance on specific issues, but it's more like we want free market, free trade, like things like that. I was like, oh, this is great. So that was my initial thought. And now obviously I'm here and I'm supporting you guys, and I think this is really needed. So kudos to you guys.
Oh, we'll talk about land value taxes after you tourism and all those things. Jason,
Yes.
You've been part of our current and ongoing social media campaign. We are the LA New Liberals, which is going on mostly the app formerly known as Twitter.
Right.
But in that statement that you posted with your picture and the community you live in, which is now is Burbank, you mentioned that pragmatism sits at the heart of liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
Unpack for me a little more, if you would, that notion about pragmatism. Could pragmatism not sort of be, the tepid hallmark, even an obnoxious hallmark of a no label sort of centrism? What makes this liberal pragmatism different, and why is it indeed liberal?
Sure. So on the subreddit on Reddit, but also on our Slack, they often share all of these old school British liberals posters from when the British liberals were, a big party in the UK. And many of them have these penny farthing bicycles, like those with the giant wheels and the tiny wheels in the back, to illustrate the idea that the balance between capital and labor is what throws you off. And if you have a proper bicycle with equally sized wheels, and you have capital and labor in balance, that everything runs much more smoothly. And I love that illustration, both because I love the old timiness of it, but also just the visual symbolism is amazing. I find that for many groups of all across the spectrum, they care more about having their side win than they care about having a successful implementation, right? If you go and ask a Republican how to solve a problem, they will always tell you it's cut taxes and end regulations, right? Regardless of what the problem is, they have that solution. And if you go to the left, they'll tell you to tax the 1% because somehow you can get infinite money out of rich people that will, revolutionize the universe. But ultimately, being liberal means being clear-eyed, right? It means looking at the problems we face, being scientific and unbiased about the best solution, and then ultimately being egoless about accepting good ideas wherever they might come from.
I hear a lot these days that I guess whatever party you can think of, especially in the House of Representatives, that everyone's a legislative arsonist, that they're not actually serious about passing anything meaningful.
Sure. So
or worse yet, they're looking to sort of cultivate their social media personality.
yeah, absolutely.
And ending up on MSNBC or Fox News, depending on the
Yeah, how outrageous can you be?
That's right. Matti, back to you. The Center for New Liberalism officially defines itself as subsisting within the center-left space of American politics. However, you hear some conservatives, perhaps far fewer and diminishing number of conservatives, also say that they defend liberal values, often with the modifier of classical liberal values. At the risk of annoyance, because I've asked this before many times, and I probably will continue to do so, why the center-left?
Yeah, no problem. I enjoy this question because of what we're seeing within the party, and just how polarized it's gotten, how extreme it's gotten. But the kicker of it is that that's not how the majority of voters feel. So that could be its own discussion, right? But why the center left? It's because it's now. Because right now, if we want to advance change, this is where we need to look, in the center left of the political spectrum, right? Most of the changes that we're thinking through are going to be implemented because they pass through some sort of legislative chamber, whether it's local or city or state, and federal. And most of the success is going to come from the center left, and usually Democrats, for the big issues that we're thinking through right now, right? Housing, where are we going to get the wins that we as liberals believe Americans deserve? So while our values haven't changed, wherever we land on the political spectrum, because of where we need to advance policy now, we're landing at the center left.
Very good answer. Now we're in sort of a rapid fire series of questions, but you can obviously take as long as you want or feel like. And we'll start with you, Jason, first. Sure. Can you name a political figure that you think best fits the sort of politics you want to see advanced, and why did you choose this person?
Sure, I'll choose Obama. Okay. Obviously, he was a relatively cerebral politician, which I appreciated. He had great ideas in general, but also I think that he's a cautionary tale about maybe being too idealistic in many ways, or just not appreciating what your opposition is capable of.
Matti?
I always have to say Scott Peters in San Diego.
Congressman Scott Peters for everybody else.
Yes, of course. He was my congressman before I moved away. So I'm a Southern California girl at heart. I am right there with you guys today. Trust me. But I think really what gets me excited is the people getting energized about the political system. Election year is always, it just brings out the best energy in a lot of us, most of us, I hope, but that's really what gets me energized about advancing these candidates that we're seeing now, government officials that are not on the ballot, pragmatic liberal policies that are on the ballot. It's really the voter and just the American spirit, which sounds super corny, but yeah.
So I'm going to name someone that Thrive is supporting really hard. And then I'm going to answer for myself that's not election related, because I don't want to force my opinion on everyone. So I think Ethan Weaver is a big candidate for everyone to really consider and push forward. He's challenging Nithya Rahman in Council District 4, and Nithya was the first DSA candidate to get elected to this city council. She's been the chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee. And obviously the city has experienced a lot of failures on that front on her watch. And her district has been redrawn, so she's vulnerable. And Ethan is just a very sensible candidate that rolls up his sleeves and is a neighborhood prosecutor. And I just think he's great. So not election related is Monica Rodriguez. So she's a city council member for District 7. So she's not up for re-election right now, but she's a moderate on city council, and I really admire her. And I think she's one to watch because like she holds down the center, you know, like she gets a lot of shit from her colleagues, like both sides of her. And she's like, you know what, you're not gonna like my vote, like this is how I'm gonna vote, because this is how I know the people in my district like want me to vote. And there was a big issue that was threatening the equine life in her district, and like she got down with the vaqueros and started like with the ropes and the rodeo like on Main Street. And you know, like you gotta love someone that like really wants to spend that kind of time with her people and understand their issues. So that's what I really like about her. She keeps it real
and has a real personality and sense of humor.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to pick on you again, Noel. Could you please identify a public policy issue for which solutions are being insufficiently imagined or for which the discourse is lacking?
So everyone talks about homelessness, and not enough people are talking about the fact that the voters have approved billions and billions of dollars of money to solve homelessness. And it's just like poof, like disappeared with like no solution in sight, money disappearing like by the second, like housing units costing like $800,000 a unit to build, which is ridiculous. And at the same time, like the noise and the triage of solving homelessness has completely drowned out market solutions for the housing crisis, which is that like we just need housing builders, like people like merchant builders to build housing. And despite everything that's going on, it's like you're a developer, you're evil, you're corrupt, you're a rapist, you're a colonizer, you're racist, you're like all of these things. It's like, wait, don't we want these people to like build things for us? Like, let's not run them out of town. So I think that people have been so focused on the triage that they're not understanding like the macro economics of the situation. And that's very concerning to me.
Matti, back to you.
I'm sorry, policy?
Policy issue, and specifically a policy issue for which we're insufficiently imagining solutions or somehow the discourse is lacking about that policy issue.
I honestly don't think that we're doing enough to cross-pollinate what we're doing on homelessness. For example, the Denver mayor, Mike Johnson, is fantastic. He got a really great plan executed in the first 6 months he was in office and got 1,000 people off the streets, 25% of which were able to get permanent housing. In San Diego, they passed a similar bill, which hadn't been implemented yet when I checked last, but I know that they are having a difficulty with providing services that match the need from the county, which is super interesting that I saw Prop 1 there in California. I think that dynamic is not shared very well, right? Like, how do you share best practices almost on those types of policy? How do you cross-pollinate and learn from each other? Which is, I guess, more of a policy drafting and policy brainstorm than a policy itself. But I would like to see how Prop 1 really shakes out in California for that homelessness situation. And I would like to see in the future how we can speed up different projects the way that the Denver mayor's timeline fit.
First of all, for the record, my house was not built by a developer. It was immaculately conceived and just appeared one day out of nowhere.
I like how the beheaded suits.
Absolutely. In terms of things the discourse is lacking on, other than my favorite topic, the Port of LA efficiency and the fact that the union there is holding the port hostage. I think that in general, the issue of cost, whether that's of transportation projects or you mentioned Prop HHH. No one is in favor of fixing the cost problem. I would expect the Republican Party to be in favor of fixing the cost problem, because I would expect them to be the party of efficiency and, doing things the smart way. But we've discussed their insanity before, so they're a lost cause. The Democrats, unfortunately, have far too many sacred cows in this discussion, because it requires them to talk about unions and public sector workers and generally their voting base. So they're not interested in talking about it, which means that we blow $1 million per apartment.
Yeah. And sort of the final rapid fire question, I should have thought of this because it could be redundant, but oh well. Duplicate plugs are always welcome, I guess, by politicians. Who is running for office right now, about whose campaign you are most excited and or inspired? And Matti, I'll go back to you.
This one's really tough, but I will preface it with, I don't have a favorite anything except a favorite season.
Which is?
Summer.
Okay.
Of course.
Yes.
But let's be specific, California summer, because Southern California summer.
It's not the DC summer, certainly.
It's not the DC summer, that's for sure. What I'm really excited about is a coalition of center-left Democrats up and down the ballot. We're starting to see that even from Central Committee up and down the coast of California. That's really inspiring. This movement for the center-left moderate Dems are starting to realize we need to band together and work together within our political party. It just makes passing legislation so much easier. And they are passing legislation that we believe in. So the moderate wave, which is what I hope we're seeing in some regions.
So I mentioned Ethan Weaver earlier. Other than that, I wouldn't describe myself as being like excited or inspired by any particular campaign. And that's really like not like because of any particular candidate as much as like a judgment of the time, which is like, it's not an inspiring time. We're not like voting for Barack Obama with this like Shepherd Ferry posters of hope. It just really feels a lot more like we just got to course correct and like not mess things up more. And so not feeling particularly excited or inspired about a candidate, but I am very, very excited to see what happens in the CD14 race, because Kevin De Leon like still has not resigned, is not going to resign, somehow is still in office, somehow still has a voting base and enough money to keep going. And from what I'm hearing, like people think he's going to make it into the runoff. And that's like wild to me that he's just like decided like, no, I'm not going to listen to your vote, like the voters, like anyone that actually put me in office, and I'm just going to get my paycheck and not be on any committees and not be allowed to vote. Like he's basically had senioritis and has decided he's going to like make it all. I don't know. So it's like, it's so really kind of interesting to see what's going to happen there. Also really like interesting to watch the DA race. Gascon's approval numbers are just totally like absolutely horrible for being an incumbent, but the field is just so big that like he's going to make it in the runoff, unfortunately. Sure. Which is like the deputy DAs couldn't get together and figure out like, okay, we're going to drop out, like you stay in so you can get enough votes. So I kind of feel like it's a little bit of Russian roulette. So it'll be interesting to see how everyone, like when people start going negative, what's going to happen. So not excited about a candidate, but it's going to be a good, TV watching season.
It's a sobering assessment. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Jason.
All right. I'm glad you asked the question because I want to attack the premise of the question.
Please.
All right.
Sort of attack, but that's okay.
All right. I think that expecting candidates to be inspiring is toxic to modern political culture. I love Obama as much as anyone, but then 2 years later, he did some stuff, annoyed people, no one voted, and we have 10 years of Republicans controlling every state house in the country, too many state houses in the country, just because Obama didn't match everyone's impossible expectations. You have Biden, who people complain isn't inspiring, but is probably the most effective Democratic president in decades. In general, I'd say the cult of Kennedy has been doing a disservice to this country for 70 years. And so to go back to the pragmatism, I think it's more important to look at what a candidate can do than how a candidate makes us feel.
Maybe you and I can make the justification about why Calvin Coolidge is in fact one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history.
I will not try to make that justification.
Yeah, well, I can try, but I'll do that in another interview. For maybe the next 4 minutes or so, just briefly, does anyone in our small studio audience right here have any burning questions that they want to ask on the record? Which is fine, you can always adjourn and enjoy the refreshments afterwards anyway, because
We'll take them off the record.
we are well past time and have to be off the record. But with that, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Matti, for zooming in from DC. Thank you both, Noel and Jason, for speaking with us this evening.
Absolutely.
And with that, I wish everybody well. Go vote in the primary season, and we look forward to seeing you next month for a panel on everybody's favorite LA topic.
Ballots drop February 5th.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
So vote early, vote often, only once per election.
Absolutely. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night, y'all.